Okay, here we go. Hi, Paul. Can you
Hi.
tell us a little bit about yourself and where we are?
Sure. Well, it's great to have this opportunity to meet you all. Well, at least kind of meet you. So we're at Wilson's Orchard. We're just north of Iowa City, between Iowa City and Solon. We have about 45 acres of apples between two farms. This farm is all pick your own apples, and we also grow quite a few other crops. It's a family business. My wife and I own it. Our two kids work on the farm as well. But we grow, in addition to apples, we grow pumpkins, raspberries, blueberries, tulips, sweet corn, cantaloupe, watermelon. We grow sheep. Yeah, so we have quite a few different crops that we grow. And then we also make a lot of stuff from those crops. So in addition to just fresh apples, we make fresh apple cider, cider donuts, we make pies, turnovers, all that kind of stuff. We also have a couple of restaurants that turn apples and other stuff that we grow and other local growers grow into meals. So that's what we do. And we have over 100 different varieties of apples that we grow. Some of them are just a few trees, some of them are several thousand trees. It just depends on the variety. Our most popular variety is Honeycrisp, but we have lots of other varieties as well. And sort of some are sweeter, some are tartar, some are bigger, some are smaller, just some are red, some are yellow, lots of different varieties. So I'm not going to talk a lot. I'm kind of looking forward to answering questions as much as I can. So yeah, fire away if you guys have any questions.
If you would like to explain the process of starting a tree or beginning to grow an apple tree and what that looks like.
Okay, so this is a great question. Basically, if we took an apple and cut it open, we would have seeds in the apple. And we could plant those seeds in the ground and we could grow an apple tree, for sure. It would grow up as long as it had water and sunlight and things like that. The problem is that this apple is a Jonagold. It was the result of a cross-pollination between a Jonathan apple and a Golden Delicious apple. So if we plant the seed from this, an apple tree would grow up and it would produce apples, but it would not produce a Jonagold apple. For the same reason that each of us is not exactly our mother or exactly our father. We're kind of a hybrid of our mother and father. The same thing is true with an apple. So the only way that we can make every tree in this row a Jonagold apple tree is by grafting. And that's done down here. We basically grow a wild apple tree up, and then we take a piece of a Jonagold tree and we cut it off and we splice it in. And this is called the graft union right here. We do it through a process called grafting, and we splice in a piece of this tree into a wild apple tree, and then we grow that splice out into a tree so that it is an exact copy, an exact genetic copy of the Jonagold tree that we want. And every apple tree is grown that way in a commercial orchard and even in your home orchard, because that's the only way you can be sure that you get a Jonagold or a Jonathan or a Honeycrisp or whatever apple you're trying to grow. They're all grafted trees.
So we had a couple questions. The first question is, do you know what was the first variety of apple ever planted? And the second question is, how much water do they need?
Yeah, I don't know what the first apple ever planted. Most of the early varieties of apples, like we're talking 200, 300, 400 years ago, were actually grown up from seeds. And they were not used for eating. They were used to make a kind of alcohol called hard cider. And that was what most of that, so it didn't really matter if you had trees planted from a seed, because you didn't care what the variety was, you just wanted apples. I don't know of any records about what the first apple tree was that was planted. What was the second question?
How much water do trees need?
Yeah, so that depends a lot. They use a lot of water, but they also have very deep roots. It's not like growing corn or soybeans or something where the roots are quite shallow. These roots go deep into the ground, and so they can draw water from a wide variety of areas. But mostly, more and more, in Iowa, we're learning to use irrigation. We use small pipes, very small, like as big as your finger, and they're plastic pipes, and they have little tiny holes in them, and they just give a little bit of water. They're called drip irrigation. They just drip water, like drip, and then a little bit later, drip, and a little bit later. And over time, they just provide just enough water without evaporating a lot of water and wasting water. It's a very efficient way to use them. But yeah, apples, apples are mostly water. The trees have a lot of water in them, so it takes a lot of water to grow an apple.
So our next question is, if an apple tree gets sick or has any sort of diseases, what do you do? How do you save that tree? Have you had any trees die on your farm?
Oh yeah, we always have trees die. And there are several really difficult diseases. One's a bacterial disease we call fire blight, and that one is spread from the rain. It can be spread by derecho like we had last year, heavy winds, but mostly it's spread during bloom time, during the time when the flowers open up. That's an opening into the tree itself, and we can spread this disease, and that quite often will kill a tree. So the main thing we do there is pruning in the winter. If we see that disease around, we can see it in the winter, we cut that out and we take those branches out and we burn them. And there are other diseases that come on the apples or on the leaves or something. As much as possible, we try to avoid spraying chemicals, but there are diseases that we spray pesticides for, fungicides, things like that. Most of that is done in the springtime. By the time summer comes and it's drier, there's a lot less diseases. The other problem could be insect damage, and we can see examples of that. Say this apple right here. So this is an apple that probably has had a insect bite the side of it, or we'll see what the deal is there. Okay, so that's clean on the inside. Sometimes holes like that mean that there's a worm inside the apple trying to get out. But we have found a really interesting way to control worms in apples without using pesticides. And this is a little bit complicated, but stay with me a minute. We basically, this insect is called a codling moth. And when a codling moth female is ready to lay eggs, it attracts a male by giving off a certain smell. The males of that codling moth are attracted to that smell. And what we've learned to do, we being all apple farmers, is we hang little strips throughout the orchard, about 200 strips per acre of fruit, and that is the same smell that the female is giving off. So the males get very disoriented. They can't ever find the females, and if the female doesn't find a male, they don't lay the eggs. So that is called mating disruption, and it's becoming widely used. We use it extensively here to control this insect without using chemicals, which is important.
So you can see that since you just cut that apple open, it's starting to turn brown.
Yep.
Why is that?
So that's an oxidation process. So you can see the browning will start. Some apple varieties are naturally quicker to brown, and some are very slow to brown. We're picking a variety right now called Snow Sweet, which stays quite white for a long time, even after you're done slicing it. That browning doesn't affect the flavor. It doesn't affect anything. There's nothing wrong with eating apples that have browned after you cut them open. It's just oxygen getting to the flesh. You know, when this apple's closed up, there's no real oxygen inside. once you open it up, that oxygen comes in and that creates some browning on the apple. Like I say, some varieties, the parent of this is a Jonathan, and that variety browns very quickly. The other parent is a Golden Delicious. That variety browns very slowly. So put them together, this is probably a medium browning one.
How many apples can one tree produce?
So these dwarf trees, like this one, we will expect to produce about 100 apples per tree. So that 100 apples would equate to probably about 80 pounds, 70 to 80 pounds on this, because these are big apples. This Jonagold is a big apple. Some varieties are bigger apples, some are smaller apples. This one happens to be quite a big apple.
Can you show us how to pick an apple properly?
Yes. So the main thing you want to know about apples is, if we look right here, we can see that this apple is growing on this very short branch right here. We call that a spur. That spur takes us 3 years to get an apple from. When it starts to grow, it grows a little bit, and then the next year it grows a little bit more, and then the third year it can have an apple. If we just take that apple and pull it, more times than not, we take that spur completely off the tree. So we don't want to do that, because then we have to grow another spur. If the spur stays intact, we can produce fruit year after year. So the proper way to pick an apple is to cup it with your hand, twist it a little bit, and then pull it. You don't just pull directly, you twist first, twist like that, and then pull. And that's how you properly pick an apple.
Okay, so we have a couple more questions.
Sure.
Did the derecho affect your farm, and what apple is your favorite?
Okay, the derecho did affect our farm. So altogether, we have 2 orchards, and we have about 25,000 apple trees altogether. And the derecho knocked down a little more than 500 of those trees. So we're still kind of cleaning up after the derecho. But if we see down the row here a little bit, we can also see the other effect of the derecho. It didn't ruin these trees, but you see how they tipped over? Yeah, that was the effect of the derecho. They tipped over. They're still growing and they'll be okay, but it tipped them over. The derecho also, it happened in the early part of August. I think it was the 10th. So some varieties that were close to ripe at that time, as the varieties get riper, they get easier to fall off the tree. So some varieties lost almost their whole crop to the derecho last year. We think we lost about a quarter, about 25% of our crop last year to the derecho, plus 500 apple trees. It's hard to say about my favorite apple, because I mean, I have favorites through the year. Right now, I really like Crimson Crisp. That's one of my favorite. It's nice and crunchy, but it has a little bit of tartness to it. I like a little bit of tartness, not just sweet apples. Later in the year, there's a great variety called Gold Rush. That's really one of my favorites year after year. But the truth is, the great thing about apples, like some other fruits, is that they come on in stages. So the first apple we pick is around the 4th of July. That's a Lodi. And that apple really doesn't taste good, but it makes fantastic applesauce. And it's just like the first apple of the year. It's really fun to eat it. And then there's other varieties that come in August and other varieties in September, so that I sort of have a favorite apple every 2 weeks.
Okay, so you have lots of trees. How do you manage to get all the work done, and do you use any special tools or equipment?
Good question. Yeah, we use, fruit growing is still very labor intensive. So we have, like I say, about 25,000 apple trees. Each one of these trees has to be pruned every year, and that happens in the winter time.
And can you explain what pruning means?
Sure. So pruning is important to trees, because again, we're trying to get sunlight not just to the outside of the tree, but we're trying to get sunlight clear into the inside of the tree. So if we have a branch like this one that's growing up, we want to take that out, because that just provides a lot of shade to the inside of the tree. So if we were to take this one out, then this branch can have all of this area to bring sunlight into the tree. And then, like I said earlier, the other advantage of pruning is we can take out diseased parts of the trees. And those are the two biggest advantages or the biggest reasons for pruning. If you don't prune apple trees, you just end up with kind of a bush, and all the apples start to be only on the outside of the tree, nothing on the inside of the tree. The tree starts to, especially from the inside, become a little bit sickly. Trees really need sunlight to grow.
And then how many employees do you hire for the season?
Well, it varies a lot. Like right now is our busiest season, so we have well over 100 people. But in the quiet time during the winter months, we're down to 20 some people.
Okay, so we have a couple questions. They ask, what do you use your apples for? Where do you sell them? What do you make with them? And some of the varieties you mentioned, they don't recognize. Can you find them in the grocery store?
Yeah, you won't find a lot of these varieties in the grocery store. The grocery store apples are really
mass produced.
They're mass produced, and they're designed so that they can store a long time. We try to grow apples here that really taste fantastic. So a lot of these varieties like Crimson Crisp or Gold Rush or Snow Sweet. Snow Sweet's a great example. It's an apple that we're just starting to pick right now. It has a brilliant white flesh. That's why the snow is in the name. It's a very sweet apple, and it has lots of really interesting flavors. It doesn't just taste just a little bit tart and a little bit sweet. It has lots of interesting flavors like a little bit of lemony flavor, a little bit of buttery flavor, people describe it as. And so that's an apple, though, if you put it in a store, it gets soft pretty quickly. You pick it right off the tree and eat it within a week or two. It's just a fantastic apple, but you could never ship it to Nebraska or California or somewhere and have it hold up. So that's why you won't recognize a lot of these varieties. And that's really the advantage of a lot of the local foods that you can buy are great, because you can grow stuff that you can get great flavor from, great nutrition from, and which grocery stores can't carry because they just don't store well enough. Tomatoes are a perfect example of that. You know, a freshly grown tomato is just a great thing, but if you pick it in California and ship it all the way across the United States, you can't pick it ripe. And that's the other problem with apples, is if we want to store them for a long time, we can't pick them fully ripe. But really good tasting fruit tastes the best when it's really ripe. And the other question?
And then what do you make your apples?
Yeah, so we make a lot of things. Apples are a very versatile fruit, which means you can make a lot of things from them. Of course, you can make apple pies, you can make apple turnovers, but we also make cider. So we take apples that have some imperfections and we grind them up. We have a machine that grinds them up, and then a press that basically squeezes the juice out of that. So that juice we can put into a jug and we can sell it, and you can find that at all the Hy-Vees around. Or we can take it the next step and we can ferment it, which means we can take the sugar from those apples and turn it into alcohol. And of course, you guys are too young for that, but maybe your parents enjoy a sip of alcohol every now and again. And this is called cider, hard cider, which used to be the most popular alcoholic drink in America. So yeah, you can do that. We make vinegar as well. Apple cider vinegar is very good for your stomach and for your insides. It also can be used for salad dressings and stuff like that. We can dry apples, which we do. We slice them up real fine and then put them in a dehydrator, and they're crunchy like potato chips, but they're nice and tangy and sweet. That's a great treat. Got lots of, the thing about apples that's really good is that they're very good for your stomach because they have a lot of pectins in them. So pectins are the things that make applesauce thick and things like that. And that's a very, very good fiber, and you need lots of fiber in your life to keep your guts going good. So that's yet another thing that we do with apples is we make also applesauce. Yeah, so we make lots and lots of different things. We also make granola with apples. We make breads with apples. We make lots of sweet things with apples like that.
And you sell that right at the orchard?
Yeah, a lot of that we just sell at the orchard. In the stores, we only sell apples, sweet cider, and alcoholic cider pretty much.
So there's a question on here. In a lot of Disney movies, they talk about poisonous apples. Are there any poisonous apples that they should stay away from?
No.
No.
There's no apples that are poisonous. Not true apples. There are probably things that may be called apples, like there's a thing called a hedge apple, which is Osage orange. It's not an apple at all. And that one actually isn't poisonous, but it's very bitter. But apples, yeah, no, you're good. You can eat it. Yeah, I mean, if you ate a whole bushel, you might have a stomach ache, but that'd be about the only thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do we have any other questions? If you would like to unmute, you can. If you want to keep writing them in the chat box, that works for us too.
Yeah. So one of the things I can talk a little bit about is how to know whether an apple is ripe or not. And what we go by is a couple of things. So when an apple faces the sun, like this one, you can see the red side here is where the sun was, and it's shaded here by the leaf. So we expect when we pick that up, that's why that spot right there isn't very red. But we don't pay a lot of attention to the front side of the apple when we're picking. We look at the back side. You can see how the side that isn't facing the sun has a lot more green, and we watch that green because that gives us an idea when it's going to be ripe. That green will be really strong green in the beginning, like almost as green as like the bottom of these leaves. And then that'll change into a kind of a whitish green, which is kind of what's happening here. So you can see how strong this green is? That's how it starts off, like this color of green. And then it turns into a lighter colored green like that. It's almost whitish, yellowish green. And that's when we want to pick an apple usually, when it'll go from that into a bright yellow. And that is usually a sign that the apple is quite ripe. It'll taste great, but it might be soft. And most people don't like to really eat soft apples. So we like to see people pick apples when they are fully ripe, but they're not soft yet. And that's why it's important to get people out to the orchard, because it's hard to do that, to get apples to people in a store that way. They can come out here and pick their own and find just that right time to pick them, but in the store it's not really that possible.
What apple was founded in Iowa?
Oh yeah, so everybody probably knows the Red Delicious apple, and that was one of the main ones. That was probably the most popular apple, and that was in Peru, Iowa, over by Winterset. That tree is still there. I went to see that tree. It's still in the middle of a field, and it's an interesting story because the fellow that owned that piece of land had an apple tree that just kept, it was growing in his fence line. So there was a fence, and up came this apple tree from a seed, and he cut that tree down because he didn't want it in his fence, and it came up again, and he cut it down again, and then for whatever reason, for some years he didn't cut it down, and it started to produce apples. And he tried them. He said, oh, that's a pretty good apple, right? And this was back in the over 100 years ago. And the apple was so good at that time, they used to have competitions for who had new varieties of fruit. And he submitted a sample of this apple into the competition, and he won the competition, which was quite a big thing because it was a competition from all over the United States. But unfortunately, he sent a little tag saying where that apple was from and his name and stuff, and that tag got lost. So nobody knew. They knew this apple had won, but they didn't know who to tell. So the next show was 4 years later. He entered it again, and he won again, but this time they had the tag, so they let him know. And the guy that tried the apple, one of the judges, he said, oh, that's delicious. And so that's how the name Delicious came into being.
And wasn't it, I had heard a rumor that the farmer originally called it the Hawkeye apple. Is that true?
The apple is called a Hawkeye Delicious. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, that is true.
Can we see the names of the varieties, the signs? So one
Sure.
of the questions is, how do you keep track of all of the different varieties?
Yeah, so we know because we're in the orchard all the time what the varieties are, but of course most people coming to the orchard don't know. So we put a sign up, and we want to tell people 3 or 4 things. We want to know the variety's name, but we also want to tell them when it's time to pick that apple. And so here we said mid-September for John of Gold, and then we talk about the flavor. And we give little symbols. This one is of a lemon, means there's a little bit of tartness, but it's also, there's a picture of a candy. So it's a balanced apple. It has both tartness and sweetness. And that's important to most people. And then we talk about how to use it. Well, you can eat it fresh. There's a bite out of that apple, or you can bake with it. Okay, so there are different things that we convey to people by our signage. Every row that we have is marked this way. And then if you look up there, we also have orange flags. The orange flags are just a reminder to people that these are ripe and ready to grow. The rows that don't have flags are either already passed, they're already picked, or they're not ready just yet. So those 2 rows there are ripe, ready to go, but the next 4 rows are still not to be picked yet. There's Fuji and something, and then there's some Golden Delicious down there, Mutsu. There's Fuji, Mutsu, and then 2 rows of Golden Delicious. Those Golden Delicious will be ready probably next week, and the Mutsu the week after, and the Fuji the week after that.
Okay, so my Zoom is actually going to end here in a few minutes. So if we just want to wrap up, thank you everyone so much for joining our farm chat today. If you have additional questions that we didn't get answered, please send them to Becca or I. You can email them to us, and we will be happy to answer questions or find you additional resources. And thank you, Paul, for joining us today. Do you have any last comments you would like to include in our farm chat?
No, it's really a great program. We enjoy being part of it, and let us know if you have any further questions. And please, kids, you guys are important. You can help us. Let us know what you like when you come out to a farm, what you didn't like, if there are any things that you didn't like, and things like that. But mostly it's get out to farms and get to know farms. It's an interesting life. It's an interesting thing to do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Everyone.
Yep.